what I'm going to kick off with is the kind of church that you're going to lead. So that's a question. What kind of church do you want to lead? And then after lunch, my final session, I'm going to be looking at the dynamics between elders, lead elders, and we're going to be looking at women in ministry and see how that dynamic plays out on a leadership team. So what kind of church you're going to lead? I think amongst you today are guys who've just taken over. Who's just taken over church in the last year sitting here? Here they go. Jakes, have you met Hein? The bearded boys. You should meet each other. You could be helpful to each other. And then there's a bunch of you who I know have led churches before, and then some planters. So I suppose when you answer that question, what sort of church am I going to lead? The question I think you're going to be asking if you're sitting here, if you're not leading already, is am I going to transition a church like these two guys have done? And it's literally weeks for these boys, these couples. Or are you going to plant a church? Because the skills required and what's demanded of you in those situations are very different. It's unique. And so we maybe touch on some of that in the Q&A. Then I also suppose you're going to be asking this question, where? Because is it going to be rural? The church that I lead has multiple sites. So I have the joy of being able to see things in townships and in university campuses and in squatter camps and at country clubs and in inner city and in suburbs, and to see the differences. And where you plant shapes the type of church you're going to lead, because the church is made of people, and people come in with their own idiosyncrasies and ways of doing life. So given that those are going to be unique to you, what I'd like to do is talk a little bit around the stages that a church goes through, because the type of church you're going to lead is going to depend to some extent on the size of that church, but also the life cycle of that church, where it is positioned. And so I'll give you a little illustration before we kick off. Many years ago, I was running a foundation class, or what we call in our church, starting point. So if you want to make One Life your home, you'd come to starting point. And I saw a guy on starting point that I knew. He was an elder in a church that I'd preached in multiple times before. And I said to him, "Bud, I didn't even know you had popped into Maritzburg. When did you arrive?" So he says, "No, I've been in Maritzburg for 3 years already." I said, 3 years? It's taken you a long time to get to starting point? He says, yes, because yours was not the first church that I tested out. Now, I used to go to that guy's church. He was a co-elder with another guy. And they were like partnering with us. So I wanted to know why. I said, well, why not? He said, well, my lead guy, who happens to be a friend of mine, said, listen, Maritzburg's got a lot of good churches in it. Go and have a look at them. But whatever you do, don't go to One Life Church. Now, I was a little bit horrified. And so I said, do you mind if I ask if he gave you a reason why? This is at a starting point course. So he says, yes. So no, it was pretty simple. He said, listen, you're a musician and you're a preacher. And One Life Church is a big church, got lots of bands, it's got lots of leaders, got lots of preachers. They don't need you. Go find a little church where you can add value, and that's where you'll settle. So I said, well, how did that go? He says, well, I'm here, aren't I? This is my observation after I'd got over my hurt that my friend thought our church was not a good one to attend. I used to get asked to go to that church to help him grow. He used to always put that to me. He used to say, teach teaching to our leadership team, give me the tools how to make this thing grow. And yet I'm thoroughly convinced that guy, I followed his progress. He doesn't know. I've actually told the story about 10 times since I was wounded. I'm just rehearsing it and nursing it and getting over the pain. He's led a few churches since, and his churches have never grown over 150 people. He's got this default setting that big church, although he wants it, big church is actually bad church. If he didn't think that, he would have said to his mate, go there, because there's something that you can do there, something you can learn there, something you can grow with there. Nobody doesn't. He says, stay away from that. Go to the small church, because small is good. Small is where you're going to be needed, wanted, used, and be able to thrive and flourish. Now, I'm going to say this to you. I'm going to give you some stages now in the growth of a church. I don't think that there is a correlation between healthy church and size. Because I've seen some very small churches that are very unhealthy. And I've seen some very big churches that are very unhealthy. But I've also seen some small churches that are extremely healthy. And I've seen some big churches that are thriving and extremely healthy. So I don't think health and good church, if you like, is a function of size. It's something far deeper than that. So I'm going to take you through a little metaphor that I picked up, goodness knows where, and it's been very helpful to me as we plant and as we grow churches. So church, for me, is peculiar. It's unique. And the best illustration, because come from a sporty sort of family, is sport. When you plant, just so that I know who I'm talking to here, is anyone planning to plant in the next 6 months? Next 6 months? Okay, cool. If you don't have a big launch team, it could be that your plant is much like a deck athlete. You're going to do pretty much everything, pal. So you preach, or the wife preaches. The other one listens. If you've got kids, they work the projector. The dog is at the welcome mat. And if your mother or sister or brother arrives sometime to come and encourage you, they make up the crowd. And so you know what a deck athlete does? He does a little bit of everything. A little bit of sprinting, a little bit of shot put, a little bit of high jump. That's how it is when you start. And it needs a lot of courage to be a deck athlete. But after a while, you find some people to do life with you, and that church grows from your little family to up to around about 30. Just give me license with these numbers, but they're pretty accurate. Till about 30. Enough to fit into a single lounge. But that stage of church, I'll call golf. Because like on a golf course, you know when you play golf, you don't all hit everyone else's ball, you know that. Golf is basically, for those who don't play, you each have your own ball, you each have your own set of clubs, and you play your own game next to each other. That's golf. You don't mess with another guy's ball. You don't tell another oak how to play golf. You're just doing life together. Very often when you plant a church, that's it. You might have called the day, but you're not really the leader. Not in those early days. They're busy checking you out. They're doing life, this Christian life, alongside you. It's like golf. And it's very comfortable in a lounge. And, you know, what's required to play golf? Well, I think what's required to play golf is the skill to get people to get onto the golf tee with you. Yesterday afternoon, at about 2 o'clock, I made a spontaneous decision to have 9 holes at Rondebosch. And I quickly phoned 6 of my golfing mates. No one could make a decision. Well, Cape Town traffic is bad, so I was actually giving them 30 minutes to make a decision. So I played golf on my own. It's one of the most sad things I had a yellow ball and a white ball, and I hit the white ball, and then I played the white ball against the yellow ball, and I had a lot of conversations with myself in those 9 holes. White ball beat the yellow ball, by the way, but it's sad, man. Sad if you haven't got people with you. So if you're going to plant and you're going to play golf, your number one skill is to be able to gather people, take them along with you. And if you're not a good gatherer, find a gatherer and make him the only dude who you invest your heart and soul in. I think another important thing about golf is that you have a support team with you. And so because you don't want to stay at golf too long, that's like house church. The greatest trauma in church growth happens when you blow through that 30 to 50 mark. And you move from golf. It's so traumatic. It's like you're changing sports. You're moving from golf to basketball. There's nothing similar about those two sports. Basketball, there's one ball. Basketball, there's hot and sweaty. There's a captain. You all have one goal, one vision, one dream. You're all on one court. You've got to cooperate together. You've got to walk together. You've got to work together. And it's so traumatic, this switch from golf to basketball, that most your golfers leave you. Those of you planting, I'm just warning you in advance to protect your heart. Because it's real, man. When you plant, you invest in them, you've gathered them, you shared your life with them, but they've bought into doing life like a golfer, doing his own thing. And all of a sudden, when you stand up and say, this is what we're doing, we have a dream, we have a vision, we have a plan, we're going to rent a hall, we're going to leave my lounge, the dude's saying, well, who died and made you the boss? Why aren't I able to do my own thing? I must come and do your thing. Why must I follow you? I don't like this. This is way more commitment than I've ever had, way more energy than I've ever had before. And so you lose a lot of them. Demoralizes. In fact, I know a lot of golfers who, when they tried to play basketball, it was so traumatic, they just packed up. Now, I think you play basketball up until you hit about 200 people. And playing basketball requires quite a bit of skill, because entry-level basketball is like 30 to 50 people. But the principles to take it up to 200, I'll give you 4 big principles. And when I'm down in the Cape, what I've done down there is I've planted multiple congregations. All of them now, bar one, that's at golf, and I'm planning it to get out of golf before Easter. It was planted last weekend. I don't want to stick around in that golf zone too long. The longer you stay there, the more traumatic the move. But the rest of them that we planted down there are all in basketball phase, and this is what we're busy with right now. You've got these 2 pistons that, let me just change the metaphors. You've got these 2 pistons that drive a congregation from 30 up to 200. Mission and community. Those are 2 massive things. And so if you can't instill a culture within the life of the church to invite their friends, to see people getting saved, to celebrate that stuff happening, you're not going to have a big open door. And so it's going to be slow growth. The reason the church exists is to seek and save the lost and disciple them, and it's an ongoing cycle of seeing people saved and discipled and saved and discipled. But the discipleship loses its meaning if salvation is not happening at the same time. Son of Man came to seek and save the lost. In basketball, you want that front and center. And so, how do you do that? How do you establish a culture? Well, let me just give you these 4 quickly, and then I'll reverse back. I'm just wanting to see what I can include here. So, front and center is mission and community. I think the third thing that's critical in basketball is clear vision. to be able to articulate the vision, clear vision, and a core team that develops around you. Because that's the difference between golf and basketball. The growth element is multiplied, not added. If I'm going to grow something just by my capacity increasing, it's growth by addition. If I can multiply myself in somebody else, and that person can multiply himself in somebody else, you've got growth by multiplication. That happens when you develop a core team around you. So your core leadership team, mission, community, and vision. Those four things are the things that you're working on to take a church from 30 up to 200. So let me pause and go through each one of them very, very slowly. Firstly, the issue of mission. One of the congregations that we're busy with down in the Western Cape, it's the only one like this, had been established about 10 years before, was being led by someone, and the church over COVID nearly died. I attended 3 services in a row, 31 people, 31 people. So it was a small congregation, and they had asked if they could join us. And I sent them off to Marcus, delayed it for a whole year, and very reluctantly said, okay, we'll come on this journey with you. But in that crowd, they had no culture at all regarding mission and seeing lost people saved and seeing visitors come to church. And so now, after 10 years, a culture has been established in a church. Now, for you to establish, cultures aren't established by accident. There's a very good reason why a culture exists in a church. I'll give you a couple of reasons. One, opinion leaders set your culture. Your strong leaders, the ones you give the microphone to, the guys who get all the profile, they set the culture. So if your most popular people, your influencers in your community don't give a continental about lost people and never invite people to church, guess what? You're going to have a culture that doesn't give a continental about the lost and doesn't invite people to church. So how do you change that? Well, you've got to look at the people that you've got, and you've got to see the ones that have got that thing inside of them, that heart of Jesus for the lost, and you've got to give them the floor. You've got to tell their stories. So a guy relocated to this particular area from KZN with me, a chap called Sham. He was a Hindu, got saved in one of my congregations in Maritzburg about 4 years before coming to Cape Town, and he was radically saved. He's a bit of a gym bunny, and so every person that he meets in the gym, he says to them, you should come and join me at church. This is cool here in gym, but it's much better at church. I don't know what he says. Exercise for your soul. I don't know what he says. But he drags them into church. He was the newest addition to that church. But that guy, I've told more stories about that guy than anybody else in that church. A guy got saved here in Joburg, relocated down to the Western Cape about 2 weeks after he got saved. But his testimony was radical. He hadn't even joined our church properly yet. I dragged him out of the crowd. I got his permission first before I did it. I dragged him up out of the crowd, and I interviewed him. People were weeping as he was telling his story. And then he said, I want you to meet my daughters, my atheist daughters. So I went to the Hussar Grill. Some of you might know where that is, near the lighthouse there at Mooley Point. And he has these 2 daughters, 28 and 26. And my wife and myself, this guy and his 2 daughters, sit down at this restaurant. They order their wine. They take out their vaping sticks. These are extremely affluent people down there. And the one lady leans forward and says to me, we've been wanting to meet you. So I said, yeah, why is that? He says, well, since my dad's been hanging out with you guys, we've got like a whole new dad. This was just before Christmas. We both have live-in boyfriends. We've told them they're not joining Christmas with us today. We're going to go with Dad to Neisner because we want to meet our new dad. These are atheists, eh? The one blows a little plume of smoke, leans forward and says this: if you guys convert me, it's because of the change that's happened to my dad. Now, there is no ways I'm going to let that story go by without telling it on Sunday morning. I leave names and faces out of it to keep the innocent free from embarrassment. But you tell those stories. The stories you tell about the people that you promote set your culture. What you celebrate sets your culture. Not what you preach into, not what you berate people for. What you celebrate sets culture. If you're leading a home group and everything you want to talk about is how Western Province is winning the rugby, if that's the conversation over the coffee before home group, and it's a conversation as you say amen, you might be teaching other stuff, but you're celebrating province rugby. That's going to have a province rugby supporters culture. That's what it's going to have. What you celebrate, who you promote, what you talk about, and what you repeat sets a culture. You can't just talk about inviting people to church and, once a month. You've got to drip feed it all the time to set a culture. Why do you think Jesus says break bread whenever you get together? Because he wants us to gather around the cross. There is something about his blood, something about his sacrifice, something about the atonement that he wants us to have front and center all the time. So he says, break bread again. But we've done it 1 billion times, and again, and again. Why? I want the culture centered around the person of Jesus, the cross. Why do people get baptized? Why do we keep dunking people all the time? Every time you dunk someone in public and raise them again out of the water, you are saying a life has been transformed. Someone's given their life to Jesus. He's on the throne. This is what we're on about. I don't think you should be doing that in private in bathtubs. Drag them out in front. You know what we do where we are. Now, we haven't got it right all the time. But when we can, we just get a plastic container. Chop a JoJo tank in half. Nice thing, just put a soft thing around the top, otherwise people cut themselves going in. In my one side, we've got a grain feeding bin. It's like this, about the size of a table, and we just put a wooden frame around it. Plonk it there in the middle. We've used porta pools before. They don't work so well. Sometimes, we've actually, flooded buildings, etc. But it's actually a story to talk about, and people remember. Has cost us a few insurance claims, but if you're going to baptize anybody in your church, get as many people as you can there. Because it's a moment to celebrate salvation. And then you should ask them this question. Don't ask them why they're getting baptized. Do you know all the great theologians? Matt is a great theologian. He'll tell you there's quite a simple answer to that. And once you've heard it 1,000 times, you don't want to hear it again. You should ask this question. How did you get saved? Because that's the real reason you're getting baptized, isn't it? How did you get saved, and how did you join this family? And then you, as the preacher, can describe the theology behind baptism before you baptize a lot of them. What you celebrate, what you repeat, who you're giving profile to, the stories you're talking about, these things set a culture. And if you're wanting your church to blow through 30, 50, 100, you've got to be absolutely besotted with Jesus changing lives. Mission is critical. The second issue is community. I'll deal with it in greater detail as you blow through the 200 mark, but I say community at every level. One of the things I've seen down in Cape Town is probably 80% of the people that have joined our congregations down there are displaced. They come here from Joburg and from Pretoria and from Bloemfontein, and they've come down for a better life. But actually in God's economy, they've come down to meet Jesus. Because they've tried to integrate into the Cape culture. It's hard. Those Cape Townians, they don't want to share the energy of their mountain with anybody. So the foreigners coming in, they need help. And so as soon as they see a loving community, into the community they go. And that's where they meet Jesus. And so when I say community, I say you should set that culture. You've heard the phrase, dining room Christianity. Your elders' meeting should be greased with food. So should your deacon meetings. Before church, after church, if you have to, just get anything to bribe people to stay longer. And then small groups, we'll get into that a little later. But community is something that people are longing for. And the more digital we become, the more Zoomified we become, the more people crave authentic relationship. Thirdly, vision, to be able to articulate, to know where you're going. On Sunday night, one of our sites, it's probably got about 100, maybe 100, probably about 100 in the meeting. I don't know how many in the site, but about 100 in the meeting on Sunday night. I go to the guy who's leading that site at the end of the meeting. I had preached, and I said to him, "Are you landing the meeting?" He said, "Yes." I said, "How are you going to do it?" So he told me of 6 announcements he was going to make. So, I mean, heaven had just broken in. 6 announcements. So I said, out of all those 6 announcements, what are the most important? So he says, 1, we're baptizing people next week. So I said, cool. He had another, some of them were long-range announcements. I said to him, but you know something about it? I looked over my shoulder. I said, there are a lot of people here that are not in, we call them connect groups, in small groups. So he says, yeah. So I said, I think you should do this. I think if you point people in 6 different directions right now, they're going to not know where to run. Tell those who need to be baptized that you're baptizing next week. Come and talk to you. And then I think you should get every single home group leader to stand up. So like about 8 people stand up. And then he did it so well. Oh, he did it way better than I could ever have done it. He made them stand. He said, okay, that guy leads a group in Rondebosch. There's this massive bloke who's got like hair like a lion's mane. And he like sells them like an auction. He says, so, you don't want to come and see me. You want to go see him straight after this. I thought, gee, buddy, like you're really taking this too. And then he goes through each guy that's leading a connect group. And when that meeting ended, it was very clear in people's minds. We've been ministered to by the Lord. God's done something today. Some people are getting baptized next week, but heck, we better get into community. You've got to be able to articulate, and I think one of the biggest problems with visionaries is that they put too much out there in front. You don't want to do shotgun visionary stuff. You want to be like a marksman. That's the difference between golf and basketball. You got one hoop. You got one ball. You got one team. And that's what you're wanting to take them to. Don't complicate it too much. When you're communicating it, here's a little trick that I teach our hosts to use. Remember that there are, I don't know when I started. No, I just, did I start 11? Thanks, but, because I'm waffling a bit now, I just need to get myself on the move. So, distracted myself in time. What did I say? Oh, a trick, yeah, to our hosts of me. You see, I'm just doing a little detour, that's why I'm taking time. In a room, not everybody thinks like you. In a room, some people process primarily cerebrally, others process emotionally, and others process primarily spiritually. Now, of course, when you make a decision, every one of you will say, look, like, don't you think I've got a brain? Or like, don't you think I've got a heart? Or don't you think I worry about the Bible? Of course, every one of us is going to use all those in our grid, but we lean. Some people are real hearty people. If the guy is crying when he's preaching, whoa, you're tugging at my heartstrings. If you're telling stories, if you're telling parables, you're tugging, this just feels right. This is what I want to do. But the academics are sitting there saying, get over the mumbo jumbo, dude. What are you on about? Where are you headed? Does this make sense? This is not even logical. So and then there's others who are saying, I don't care if it makes sense or not. I don't care if you feel good about it. I just want to know if it's in the Bible. I just want to know if the Holy Spirit is in it. And so I tell our guys, when you make an announcement, when you're trying to tell people to go somewhere or encourage them to do something, have these three lenses. Number one, does the thinker relate to what I've just said? Does it make logical sense? Is there a rational reason? Has the person scoped? And if that's absent, you better include it. Otherwise, you're going to lose like a third of your congregation. Then you need to know, does the spiritual, the one who's actually not cared about logic and feelings, he just wants to know if God's in it. Have you got a testimony to back it? Have you got a scripture to back it? Because if you haven't, you better put it in. Otherwise, you're going to miss a third of your congregation. And then I saw a guy get up the other day and he made an announcement. It was cold, calculating fact, backed by scripture, but there was no heart there. There was no story. There's no life. There was no... If that's not there, you're going to miss a third of your crowd. And so as a visionary, you've got to be like a marksman. You've got to know where you're going, move it through the clutter, and make sure you drag the thinkers, the feelers, and the spiritual along with you when you target it. Vision, community, mission, all extremely important. And then in basketball, building your core team, the team that you're going to multiply with. Very important. So this morning when I was jumping on a plane, one of our sites, which is led by a muso, I saw the chaos there this weekend. Stacks of people, poor little muso running around like a chicken without a head, rushing around, finding a generator, finding the milk, charging around, people having a great time. But I thought this muso, he's never going to sing again, he's going to fall over and die. What he hasn't done is he hasn't put a team around him. And so I sat with a guy who's busy coaching that site captain and said, listen, someone needs to take responsibility over all the home group leaders. Somebody needs to take charge of that band, not the captain. Somebody needs to take care of the logistics. Somebody needs to take care of the new people coming into the life of the church. Now, I don't care how many of these leaders you got around you, but if you don't multiply yourself with trustworthy core team around you, you are never going to grow that thing. And if it does grow because you put the foot down with the mission pedal, it's going to kill you. You've got to develop skills to put that big team around you. When I mean big team, I mean big capacity people around you. We'll talk about them a little later. So, I think 98% of the churches in the world never get beyond basketball. 98%. Many people will say, I've got a church bigger than 200, because I think basketball is up to about 200. But it's 200 in a meeting. What you find is people having 200 in a meeting have probably got about 300 on their books. But there's this natural, right around the world, whether I'm in Europe, whether I'm in America, whether I'm in Australia, whether I'm in South Africa, 98% of churches, they hit a ceiling, like an invisible meeting ceiling between 150 and 200 adults in a meeting, and it just bops like that. They go through seasons when it gets down to like 100, and then it goes back up to about 200, and down again, and up again, and down again, and up again. Because what's required to blow through that is so different, it's like changing sport. It's like throwing away the basketball. And the illustration that I've got in, I know there's American in the building, so you might correct my understanding of gridiron. But rugby is not even a good illustration. Gridiron is the best. So, Josh, you can come and correct me if I'm wrong. How many people on a gridiron team? 80 something? Yeah. Okay, I think there's 85. I think there's 85 in a gridiron football team. Gridiron is so different to basketball. Let me give you some of the differences. There are multiple teams within the team. There's a defensive team. There's an attacking team. There's even a kicking team. You guys are old enough to remember Nas Boete. He was a sole South African. He was a kicker. The teams practice at different places with different goals. They've got different coaching teams around them. The big boys, I suppose they feed them burgers and all sorts of things. Spend them time in the gym, and the psychologists, they want to make them, like tough and rough, and they've got to destroy people. And you've got the skinny little dude who's supposed to run fast and score touchdowns. I'm sure they eat carrots and celery and that sort of stuff. Psychologists are helping them cover the pain that they've gone through. And they have a different captain, and they have different goals. I think sometimes they even train on different fields. And you've got a kicking team. I don't know why those kickers have helmets and pads on. Because from what I've seen, the kicker goes on, he kicks, he just sprints straight off that field again. That's his job. He just kicks for hours. Totally different teams, totally different captains, totally different preparation, totally different fields. I think it's possible if 85 people in a team, you don't even know everybody's name. Now, when you move through the 200, it is so traumatic that the people who've bought into basketball, many people say, I don't buy into what you're doing, and if you don't understand this transition, you have attrition here too. People are going to say, I didn't sign up for that. And I've got a feeling that friend that I spoke about at the beginning looked at the church that I lead and said to his mate, we didn't sign up for Gridiron, we signed up for basketball. Go find a basketball church somewhere. That's what I think, using this metaphor. Because he didn't understand. Now, to move from 200 into multiple hundreds, multiple thousands, the leadership required is hugely different. And I wasn't going to touch on this, but there are guys in this building who've just taken over churches who need to hear this. So for the rest of you who are going to plant, getting ready for golf, hang in there while I talk to these guys. So I'm going to give you 7 things that I think you need to understand. I'm going to fly through them in 20 minutes, and then we'll open it up for questions. These are the changes you've got to make. I'm going to list them, and then I'm going to go through them. You've got to move from one community to multiple communities, community to communities. Number 2, you've got to move from generalists to specialists. Number 3, you've got to move from a couple of people doing the work of the ministry to the priesthood of believers on steroids. Number 4, you've got to have mission at every level, not just from the front. Number 5, your communication has got to move from informal to formal. The most scary for the guy leading this boat is that you've got to be able to move from visionary to visionaries. And then finally, I want to give you a biblical picture that I think you need to put alongside your shepherding analogy. That's the understanding of a swarm. There is a multitude before the throne of heaven that no one can count. God is not scared of crowds. There is a picture in Ezekiel and Revelation that talks about swarming. There is a number of occasions where Jesus has got thousands in front of him, and chapters are dedicated not to the doctrine that he taught the thousands, but how he handled the thousands. So we'll talk at the very end, if we've got some time, on understanding the swarm. Okay, we'll go back to pull this apart one by one. You see, when you are playing basketball, you have one meeting venue. So this is a perfect venue for basketball. You can fit a few hundred people in here. And when you say church to someone who's part of a basketball church, they will say, yes, will you come join us on a Sunday? Why? Because community on Sunday. We've got guys who make egg and bacon rolls after church on a Sunday. They care, they hang around, you smell the bright fires, you're building community, and there's a sense of family. But this is the problem. When that community gets beyond 150, most humans on this planet will say it's not cool anymore. People like to be in a crowd for a moment, but a family? Tim Keller quoted some dude, and I read this 15 years ago, so I could be really misquoting, but it was an anthropological study that looked at hunter-gatherer societies. So pygmies, Eskimos, Aborigines, and the logic in anthropology is that if you can peel away all the roles and the layers that modernity has put on civilizations, you can peel it all away to the study of human origins. You know how we wired. That was the logic. And they looked simply at the average size of a hunter-gatherer society, community. It was 147.2. So in other words, when a community of Aborigines gets beyond 147.2, an alpha male sticks up his hand and he goes, splits it out, and they go and plant another community. I remember reading that thinking, that is profound. I read a similar thing about fighting battalions, how generals have found the most expedient size for working units. And then you have a look at the life of Jesus. When he's dealing with 5,000, he teaches the 5,000. But as soon as he wants them to kick into community, to eat together, what does he do? He splits them into groups of 50s and 100s. And he puts them, and one of the Gospels says, on the green grass. I love it that is green in Israel. Comfortable grass for 100 or 50. Why? Because you're not going to have family with 5,000. So if you think your basketball, you can just buy more and more egg rolls. If you think you can just knock the walls out and everyone's going to feel, this is home, this is family, this is my people, these people know me, you are deluded. As soon as you get to 150 odd in a meeting size, some people start to feel uncomfortable if that's their primary point of connection. So what you've got to do if you want to build that church in a healthy fashion, beyond that, is do what the early church did. When 3,000 were added to the number, what do you read in the very next paragraph? And they met from house to house. You've got to take your sense of belonging from community to communities. So that's why in basketball, it's a very good idea to have community at every level, to have it and to start your connect groups going or your home groups going. Because if you're wanting to go beyond, you don't have to. To lead basketball, you don't need home groups. You can have a prayer meeting on Tuesday where there's great community. You can have a Bible study on a Wednesday where there's great community. Everybody comes together. If you're doing just basketball. If you're good enough as a pastor, you can do that. You can get some good guys to work the room with you and it can feel like a family. But if you're planning one day of blowing through 150, you better get small groups going. Like in a way that you've never dreamed possible. And then you've got to ask yourself, so we call our small groups connect groups because we want people to connect. We want them to connect with each other, we want them to connect with the Lord, we want them to connect with the Word. And so, when I look at all these congregations that I'm working with down in the Western Cape, and every one of them has a dream to blow through into the thousands, from day one, we're saying we'll start developing home group leaders. Now, often I go to churches where I say to the lead guy when I walk out, why isn't that guy a home group leader? Why isn't that lady leading a connect group? Why isn't, and they say, gee, you know their story, you know their backstory. And it's like, geez, only been saved like 4 years. Or like, Flip, he doesn't know Abraham from Adam, that guy. Or it's like, well, is he married? Yes. Are they, is divorce imminent? No. Are the kids on drugs? No. Does he love Jesus? Yes. And you're not picking him. So another reason why guys don't pick, not because always they set the bar too high. Sometimes it's because what you ask them to do is way too complicated. You don't want them to run a little mini church service. You're not playing basketball on 20 different courts now. You want them to have community. So what is that? That means you sit in a small group. You're going to do life together. You're going to become friends together. You're going to pray together. You're going to share your lives together. You're going to walk together. Your families are going to get to know each other. You're going to go before God together. And you're saying, God, but that takes skill. This is what we do. We take our Sunday message. Now, we've got the staff to do it. So if you haven't got the staff to do it, you can actually just write down a couple of questions after your sermon if that's all you've got time to do. But if you connect your connect group meeting to your Sunday service, it'll save you a lot of pain. Let me tell you what pain it'll save you. Firstly, you become what you eat. If you are not guiding what they're talking about, one will follow Uncle Angus Buchan, another will follow Auntie Joyce Myers, some real passionate dudes will follow T.D. Jakes, and some might just invent their own thing to follow. And you will shake your head and look back in 2 years' time, and you will wonder why those guys are speaking an American accent. Those guys don't ever come to church. Those guys are always going on campouts with blokes. If you take Sunday and you find a way, I'm not telling you the way, just find a way that they can digest it. Do you know what it says in Hebrews chapter 5? That we should move from, end of Hebrews 5, from immaturity to maturity. And then this is how the writer to the Hebrews describes maturity. He says, the mature who through constant use of what? The basic foundations of the faith have moved on to maturity. How do you become mature? You apply what you've been listening to. If you're listening to something on a Sunday and you're never calling them to apply it and to at least question it and talk about it, your discipleship process is a little flawed. The other thing that will save you great pain is that guys will be not too scared to put their hand up. If you're leading a connect group with us, this is what we ask you to do. Find a space to run a connect group. We've just planted a site at Stellenbosch University. They meet under trees all over the place, in rec rooms, on tennis courts. What's going to happen in winter, I have no idea. We've just planted it. But these connect groups are meeting in places like that. So we're saying, find a place to meet. If you've got a home, that's a good place to start. And then facilitate people getting to know each other. Our younger guys play games. The older guys some have meals together. Some just, get early, have some tea, and, they're mature enough just to hang together and get to know each other that way. Then, get around the word, and then after that, we actually give them help on how to do this. Pray for the issues that have been brought up. Pray for each other. So you're not asking him to be a preacher. You're not asking him to be an event coordinator. You're certainly not asking him to be a worship leader. You're not asking him to be a mini pastor. So let me give you two illustrations very quickly. Here's another thing, guys. If you are trying to develop a culture of small groups, and none of your elders are leading small groups, you've got a problem on your hands. Why? Because your opinion leaders set your culture. So you are sending a subliminal message to everybody on your deacon team. When you get really mature, you graduate from leading home groups because home groups are not very important. If they were important, you'd be leading them. So I'm not putting this on you, and especially not you lead guys, because I do know I'm in a different season in my life. At this stage, I'm leading 2 connect groups. I'm leading a connect group in Mooley Point, which is in the inner city of Cape Town, on a Wednesday night. And I'm leading a connect group in Durbanville on a Thursday night. And the connect group I'm leading in the city is probably the most exciting connect group I've ever led in my whole life. And I've been leading these things since the late 80s. I've got a bunch of wealthy men who are my age who have just got saved. They are a mixture of miraculous awe and wonder at God's saving power and carnality mixed up. They arrive with their smokes. I remember the one meeting I had. We're sitting in this palace of a place, and I went around the room and I said, you guys have all just got saved. Tell us how that happened. So the one guy's describing how he's getting delivered. Demons are coming out of him. The other guy's like leaning on his chair. He's like, is that for real? He's like is this real Christianity? At the end of his testimony, they both asked to be excused to go smoke on the veranda just to cope with what had just gone down. Back in the meeting again. Anyway, one of those smokers, he's been saved about 3 years. Leads a massive company. Also is a bit of a sparrow. He comes to and from Joburg and Cape Town, but he's like 25 days down there, 5 days up here. And he was on holiday at Belito over Christmas. And so I said to him, listen, I'm in KZN. You should come and see where we all started, because he only knows us from, Constantia. That's the site that he goes to. Come and see where it all started 50 years ago. So he comes up to one of our services, I think it was the 10 o'clock service at our original site. And he's like overwhelmed because of, it's been there 50 years. I mean, there's something there. It's like this place. And so he says, can we go out to lunch? So we go to lunch. He says, how did this all thing start, where you started planting? So I told him about a prophetic word I had. I don't think this guy even knows what prophecy is. But this prophetic word that sort of lurched us out of Pietermaritzburg. And part of the prophetic word said, God is going to add to us, to our estate, property and mighty men. But there was something quite profound about the testimony with some rivers, etc., etc. And that's the reason I was telling him the story. He's listening with a cigarette hanging out of his mouth. I'm standing in a car park outside of a restaurant. He blows out the cigarette and he says, God, can I ask you a question? I've just got like tingly all over my arms, he says. Do you think I'm one of those mighty men? He just put out a cigarette. Do you think I'm one of those mighty men? This guy's in my home group, right? So I've already told you, I go Cape Town, Maritzburg, Cape Town, Maritzburg. In that home group are ex-elders from partnering churches from Europe. In that home group are other believers. But when I leave, who do you think I leave in charge of that home group? My mighty man. He leaves his smokes outside now. He doesn't bring them into Connect Group. But I look at that guy, and I think when he drops the smokes, God miraculously delivered him of alcohol when he got saved. And he's filled with the Holy Spirit. That guy's going to be ready. And I'm telling you, on that day, he's going to start a Connect Group. He said, Grant, the guy doesn't, I've already challenged the guy. He's on E2M. You guys heard of E2M? Because he certainly doesn't know Adam from Abraham. So he's studying E2M. He's trusting God will deliver him from his smokes. And meantime, when I'm away for that Wednesday, he assumes command. I haven't officially made him the leader. I just didn't tell anybody who the leader was. I told the ex-elder, just make sure the doctrine doesn't go wonky. And that guy just assumes command. But it's not difficult. Open the home. Go through the stuff that we're going through. Minister to each other. It's mesmerizing. Anyway, I need to stop those stories. Yeah, this is going to freak some of you out. There's an elder here in Bruce McAlpine's church who has a son who relocated to Cape Town to go and study. The boy was not in Bruce's church. He'd become a Baptist in his teenage years. But I knew this kid when he was at primary school in Maritzburg. And somehow he winds up at our Woodstock site. I see him come through the door, and I invite him immediately. I hadn't seen him since he was a little chap. Invite him immediately to starting point in my home. At starting point, he arrives. There's about 15 people in my lounge. And this guy walks in, and he starts working the room. I look at him. He's just like, he looks like the state president. He's just going person to person around the room. Looks me in the eye when he's talking to me. I say to Sue, look at this oak. We haven't seen him for 12 years. He's only been at church one day, One day. Phoned his father the next morning. I said, hey, Mike, that son of yours, the Baptist, he's pitched up at our church. He says, gee, I'm very glad about that. I said, look, is he on the straight and narrow? He says, no, he loves Jesus, man. So at the staff meeting that I went into, some of our staff were there, I said to them, did anyone meet this guy, John? And so they said, yeah, no, we met him. So I said, well, I think he should lead a home group. So they said, no, come on, Grant. We know that you want to risk with people, but he's been to church once. So I said, look, I know the family, man. And look, besides, what harm can it do? I mean, he's going to open his home. There's a whole bunch of students. Who's going to look after them if he doesn't? Anyway, I listened. I submitted to my elders. And I said, okay, here's the deal. If he comes to church one more time, I'm going to ask him if he can lead a home group. So, Bobby arrives there on Sunday night. So as he gets home, I send him a text. I say, hey, John, good to see you at church again. How are you settling into Cape Town? So he sends a message back. No, I'm settling in okay, man. So he's a very outgoing guy. So I said, this might sound a little bit soon for you, but as you see, we've got a bit of a problem. People are getting saved. People are coming. We are short of leaders. I know you. I remember your baptism when you were 12 years old. I know your mom and dad. But how would you like to lead a connect group? He says, it's definitely not too soon. Would be an honor. He's still leading that thing and multiplying them out. He didn't go on 101 how to be a leader. God, this is almost blasphemy, some of you are saying. How do you even know his doctrine? I've set the doctrine. He's got the material that he's using on a Sunday for the Wednesday or Tuesday, whenever he's having that meeting. And for those of you worried that he's, haven't gone through 1 Timothy chapter 3 with the deacon qualifications, he's not a deacon. First, he must be tested. How do you test the dude? Let him see how he's going to operate. So, you've got to move. Why am I telling you these radical stories? You've got to have this conviction that every single person in that community needs to be in a small group. And if you haven't done that, haven't made that transition from community to community, if I come to your church and I ask your people, tell me about your church, and the first thing they say is Sunday, I promise you're a basketball player for the rest of your days until you can change that. If I go to your people of your church and I say, tell me about your church, and they tell me about the friends that they've got, they tell me about what happens outside of Sunday as well as Sunday. I'm not saying Sunday is not important. You're ready for gridiron. So, one of the things I did as I got onto the plane today, one of our sites, I reckon it's only 50% are not in connect groups. So I got hold of the guys leading that site, and I said, listen, you've got someone, she's a lady actually, got a lady that has done this before. She's taken charge of all the visitors that have arrived, and we've almost put her in a facilitation role with all the connect group leaders and said, you take charge of the community list, and your job, she's very sweet, so when you get a phone call from her, you don't feel like someone's chasing you up or processing you like the MTN contract person, and get them plugged into connect groups. You've got to start thinking that way. Otherwise, you're not ready for gridiron. You still with me? I labored that point way too long, but maybe you need to hear that. So I'm going to go through this very quickly. Priesthood on steroids. Here's a simple mathematical equation that works for gridiron. Involvement equals belonging. When people are involved, they're part of the family. If you had to adopt a kid into your house, and your kids have been allocated chores, they're mowing the lawn, they're taking out the rubbish, and you said to the adopted kid, sit in your bedroom, and we're going to wait on you. The real kids in this family are going to get on with the chores. You just sit and just watch TV. Just you be the spectator. There's no ways you do that. Everything in you says, the day you arrive, boy, put the gumboots on, come and help. Brand new visitors to church. Put them on the door, man. Get them serving coffee. Get them helping somewhere. Get them involved. Not because you need jobs to be filled, but because it's good for them. If you've got this conviction, they're doing you a favor, you are going to be a pain recruiting people. But if you are thoroughly convinced that if I can find a space for you to be involved, it's going to be good for you. And here's another thing about getting people involved. They've got to see the big picture. That it's because of the mission of Jesus. It's not just for their health. It's not just for the church. It's actually everything we're doing here is to facilitate Jesus meeting with his people and new people coming to get saved. So anyway, let me move on from that very quickly. Got to be able to move from generalist to specialist. This is a subject for a whole day, actually. When Jesus was working with 12, he taught them to do a little bit of everything, and he called them disciples. A little bit of healing, a little bit of event coordinating, a little bit of driving out of demons, a little bit of evangelism, a little bit of door-to-door, a little bit of collecting the rubbish, a little bit of logistics, a little bit of everything, and he said, disciple. But in Ephesians 4, and I'm sure you're going to hear that chapter many times this week, he who descended is one who ascended, so we know he's speaking about Jesus, gave to the church apostles, prophets, pastors, teachers, and evangelists to equip them for acts of service. Now, where were they when Jesus was dealing with the 12? Well, I tell you where the prophets, pastors, and teachers, and evangelists were. They were incarnate in Jesus. Jesus was modeling evangelism. Jesus was modeling prophecy. Jesus was modeling apostolicity. But when 3,000 are added to their number, he knows they need specialist preparation for evangelism. If those gifts are given by Jesus to prepare the saints for active service, the evangelism gift does not prepare them for loving the sheep. He prepares them for evangelism. The same as the prophetic gift. And so if you're going to go from basketball to gridiron, you've got to realize that specialists are required. Let me give you an illustration on the medical side. If you go to a little village, Underberg, my kids used to live there. There's a GP in Underberg. So if you're a little bit sick, you go to that GP. If you're a little bit pregnant, you go there. If you're a little bit crazy, you go there. If you've hurt yourself a little bit, you go there. He's a GP, a little bit of everything. A little bit of psychiatry, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. That's medicating a village. It's basketball. If you come to Cape Town and you get sick, you go to a hospital where there's a psychiatric ward, and there's a pediatric ward, and there's a geriatric ward. There's an orthopedic ward. Are general practitioners still there? Of course. They're working the corridors. But they're in a different space. They're in a hospital. Now you say, God, well, I don't really like that picture because the GP, he had glasses, gray hair. He's a loving old man. He looks like Father Christmas. That's my idea of ministry. I think it's a fallacy to think that GPs are more loving than hospitals. I've been to GPs, I've been to hospitals. Who tucked me into bed at night? Not the GP. Who gave me a bed bath? Not the GP. Who fed me jelly and ice cream? Not the GP. That all happened in a hospital. It's not that it's less loving, it's just different. If you're planning on taking a city, you need specialists. Your children's church specialist should be so good. That should be the departure lounge for church planters. I'm telling you. If you guys are about to plant a church and you've never led children's ministry, put the brakes on and go and lead children's ministry for a little while. I'm not kidding. Children's ministry is church with much higher stakes. Jesus said this: you cause one of these little ones to stumble, it would be better that you had a millstone around your neck and get thrown into the sea. That's our loving Jesus. How do you cause a little one to stumble? If he stumbles out of church, if he stumbles into adult life saying Christianity is not for me, you've caused him to stumble. The stakes are high. Jesus says, you welcome one of these, you welcome me. Anyone who's involved in children's ministry can go home and say, as I welcome that kid, I welcome Jesus. I've heard people say, gee, that meeting was anointed today in the worship. Yeah, sometimes preachers think God was there. But children's church guys know God was there. Because he said, you welcome them, you welcome me. But to really minister to multitudes of kids, you've got to have a specialist doing that. If you're in a church that rotates home groups through children's ministry, you're playing classic basketball. Go for it. But if you're planning to get to gridiron, stop it. Some people don't like kids. And guess what? Kids know it. So when their home group's on duty, you haven't got the specialist in there, you got the administrator in there. Or you've got the muso in there. Or you've got somebody else in there. No, if you want to play gridiron, put your specialist where they ought to be. Why you got so quiet on that point? To help you understand this, and this will be just very quick, to find out what someone's gift is, there's all sorts of tools you can use. But I use 3 grids very quickly to help guys. Firstly, I draw 3 circles on a board. First circle I draw is this: what are you good at? Or put it this way: what does your wife say that you're good at? Because what you're good at, if you're doing the thing that you're good at, you're likely to do it for longer. And then the other question is not only what are you good at, what do you love doing? Some people love doing things and they're not good at them. You want those circles to intersect. So I have a daughter who loves singing, but we've told her it needs to stay in the shower. She can do many things in church, but it's not the band. So what you're good at has got to go through what you love to do. You're getting closer to what we call the sweet spot. And then you've also got to find something that's actually needed in the church. If you're good at and you love surfing, it's not really going to help. You're looking for something where if there's a need there and he's walking into a need, so actually there's stuff for him to do. He loves to do it and he's actually very good at it. If you can find that intersection point, that guy's going to minister there for a long time as a specialist, and he'll do well. The other rough grid that we use is, and you would have heard guys speak about this, I'm assuming, prophet, priest, and king. So Jesus, when Moses spoke about Jesus, called him the prophet. And when Stephen was preaching that sermon that got him killed, he said, remember when Moses talked about the prophet, well, that's the one that you put to death. So Jesus was known as the great prophet. He was the great high priest. He's the King of Kings. And so he has a simple little grid. Prophetic people are interested in seeing heaven break in on earth. Not really too interested in people, not really too interested in organizing stuff. They just want to see the kingdom come. They just want to see heaven breaking out. And you can hear people when they talk about church, and their eyes glitz over, and they're just like, the glory of God. That's all they're talking about, which is beautiful. Other people are more concerned about things getting done. So like Martha in the kitchen. Yeah. And Jesus loved Martha, by the way. The Bible says that on a number of occasions. And it was Martha's house that he went to because he knew there was not going to be, food poisoning. He knew it was going to be organized. He went there. You need the people that are going to organize, the kings. And then there are others who, like the priests, who just love people. of course they want heaven to come, but boy, have the people been in the presence? That's the big question. And so what I often do is just draw that little grid for people and say, okay, what? And people generally say, well, I'm motivated by all those things. I do want to see the kingdom come. I do want to see a thing organized properly. And people are saying, no, don't give me that. Jesus was all those things. He was perfect, but we lean to one of them. Where do you lean primarily? And where the guys are leaning, you get to realize you want to push that guy more to what he specializes in. But if you understand these things, as you putting people in leadership positions as you go, you're getting yourself ready for gridiron. I'm just going to go through these very quickly. Mission at every level, we've spoken a bit about that. Informal to formal communications. When Jesus was dealing with the 12, with 120, what did he write? Some of you might take me to John 8 and say he scribbled in the ground a bit. But all his communication was informal, wasn't it? But 3,000 are added, 5,000 are added. Suddenly, we have the scriptures. It doesn't mean it's any less loving. It's just required when you're dealing with thousands. So if you just a handful of you playing golf, you don't need to write anything down, really. Basketball, we're all going to be there on Sunday anyway. So if someone forgets, another uncle shout out, say, hey, you forgot that. But if you're playing on hundreds of different fields, you need a little bit more organization than that. A visionary to visionaries. You can phone me if you get to that scary place. Let me just say this thing. If our church, the church I lead, waited for me to come up with every visionary idea, you know how small we would be. The scary thing for a visionary that releases a whole lot of visionaries is control, really. But here's something you can write down. There is an inverse relationship between control and growth. The more you control something, the less likely it is to grow. You've got to know what to put your hand on. So when you release multiple visionaries, you need to know the one thing that holds them together, the one thing that points their visions to the ultimate vision. But if you're not releasing visionaries, you're going to stay small. Understanding a swarm, and then I want to leave 10 minutes, next 10 minutes just for Q&A. I'm sorry I've got distracted today, but anyway, here we go. The primary picture for leading God's church is shepherd and sheep. Not disputing that. You leave the 99. You go fetch sheep number 100. It's a beautiful picture that I meditate on often. But if you're leading gridiron, you've got to consider the possibility of a multitude. And the best metaphor for me is that of a swarm. For a swarm to be healthy, mood is important. Think about bees. You've got 5,000 in a hall. Think about bees. Mood is far more important in a swarm than it is with a sheep, because actually, we love each other, cuddle each other, we can change a mood like that. But actually, in a swarm, 90% of the people are going to have no one hug them hello. Nobody talk to them. You say, Grant, that's a horrific picture of the church. There's a congregation before the throne of heaven that nobody can count. God was not scared of crowds, nor was Jesus. When he deals with the 5,000, he is very deliberate how he handles the swarm. If you want to know how to handle a swarm, go and look at how Jesus deals with the 5,000. Even when he says goodbye, this is what he says. He sent them to the boat. The disciples go to the boat while he dismissed them. He didn't say, cheers, oaks, I'm out of here. He sent those oaks to the boat while he dismissed them. There's a different way to handle a swarm. Mood is important. Energy is important. Direction is very important for a swarm. Involvement is important. And so it has implications to your worship, how people encounter God. It has inspiration. It has implications in terms of how you handle a microphone. It has implications in terms of how you pastor people. So we can talk about that over lunch maybe. We have 6 minutes. Anyone got a question? Because I must have said something that was not coherent when I tried to race through that stuff like that. Anyone got a question or anything? Yep.
Just a small thing on your small groups.
Yes.
You mentioned multiply.
Yeah.
I was taking is multiplying them already.
Yeah.
Just on a small breakdown of that, you've got a small group, you've got a split in the small group,
Yeah.
or you've got a group that's growing exponentially.
Yeah.
When you focus on that multiplication, how would you
Practically, I mean, what we used to do back in the day is we used to split like that. The problem with that, your goal of your connect group is family. So every time you do that, it hurts. So we changed, and we do it two primary ways. I'm not saying that doesn't happen under emergencies. It does happen every now and again. But these are two primary ways. New groups for new people. That's the first way. Send a strong guy in, take a starting point, take an alpha group, something like that, and they start. Because new people have this in common. They want friends. You take a new person, you plonk them into this clique. It's difficult because you are all connected. And to actually include them in your world now takes skill. But new groups for new people is a fresh start. So that's worked well for us. The other thing that we do is that we generally, every single person leads a connect group. The first thing we say to them is who you're training up to be a leader. And then this is our preferred way of doing it. That guy who's being trained up to be a leader, he takes that group, and only one person leaves, the leader. And he goes and does another one. If he's built well, if he's built away from himself, if he's built to the new guy, if he's built people to each other, it's not as traumatic. It is traumatic, but it's not as traumatic. And that new guy, that guy's got a far better chance of getting the other one to work than the new dude who's never led a group. That guy's got his training wheels in that group. So I don't think there's any one way, but that is the way we do it. Josh?
So like, Matt talked a little bit about it as well, but when you have big capacity guys running big things, how do you keep yourself from not feeling, what's the word, guys? Insecure. Yeah, insecure, that's the right word.
So the bigger a thing gets, the more chance that you've got these big guys standing next to you. But even when it's a smaller thing, if you've got a big guy standing next to you, this is the principle. You've got to tighten the relationship, but loosen the function. So if you've got like 10 guys around, so I've got a bunch of guys around me. My thought in my mind is not, I want to control everything they're doing. The thought, because there's an inverse relationship between control and growth. They must control the thing that they're doing. But what I want to invest in is my relationship with them. So I tighten my relationships and I give them charge to run. If you do it the other way around, if you jump over and try and control what they're doing, they will feel the relationships impaired. That's the way businesses grow. Businesses grow with policy changements. Policy adjustments. So if you're going to franchise a business or you're going to grow your business, you've got to tighten up your policies, tighten up your structures, tighten up your communication flows. You've got to tighten all the administration, and people just feel like they're a number. The kingdom, it's exactly opposite. You tighten the relationships and you let the things go. So it's something I'd love to have. You've great opportunity to talk about this. Your structure. Have you heard this phrase, a flexible wineskin? So the analogy Jesus is giving there is an old wineskin that's got crusty, and if you put new wine in it, it's going to burst. And so the metaphor that we've used is actually our structures, how we roll, how we work together, our leadership teams, how we have our meetings, how we do church is our wineskin, and the wine is the life of God. And so it's interesting. Jesus says if you don't change the way you do church, you will ruin both. You'll ruin the people and the work of God. So you've got to be flexible. So a guy came to visit me once, and he came to stay for 2 days. Leads a church somewhere in the country. And he said, I'm stuck. So I said, well, how are you doing church? So he says, there's a toy that toddlers get. In this country, you've probably never seen it. But it's red on one side, blue on another. And they're little plastic shapes that you push into the holes. So you're teaching a kid how to do a triangle. Triangle goes in the triangle hole. So he says, I see church like that. I've got my model. And when new people come, I've got to work out, is he a star, is he a square, or is he a triangle? And I push him into the model. So as he describes it, I think of this parable Jesus told. I said, so how did you get your model? He said, no, I copied it from you. So he was in our church 15 years ago. So I said, hey, bud, I've got news for you. Do you know that thing you copied 15 years ago? We tore it up 14 years ago. How old is an old wineskin? I think an old wineskin can be old in a month. What should govern the shape of your model? I don't think it's the church policy, what works, not even some manual. It's who's God given you? Because the model describes the people. So if you've got a strong administrator, you've got to make room for him. You've got to move your model around him. If you've got a strong pastoring gift, you've got to make room for him. I went and planted with a whole bunch of musos. It was chaotic. At the moment, we're planting a Stellenbosch. Stellenbosch, there are 3 blokes. They all, the fact that you could be the 4th, they look like you. Curly hair, 6'3", all guitars. It's like a one-pick train. It's like a boy band. But those boys, they go into a quad, and like 200 people pitch up. So we told them to run home groups. So they each found a tree with a guitar. 40 people pitch up. Dudes, do you own Bibles? No, we just want to like wait before God. Our model has somehow got to embrace that musical gift. I'm having breakfast with them on Thursday morning, 7 o'clock in Stellenbosch. They're hiring a theater, and the boy band's coming out. That is not how we planted in Noordhoek or the other places we planted it. The model has got to work around the gift. You've got to ask yourself this question. Who has God given me? And then shape how you do church around that. And then what you've got to do is you've got to hang on to those guys. So one of those chaps, if he gets this tape, now you'll know what I did. One of those guys was sort of like, he's a strong chap, but he was sort of like balking against the plant. Then I found out he had a girlfriend. Was not part of One Life. But I know her dad, love her dad. But she's been checking out other churches. New student, just new to Stellenbosch. So I said to him, bud, coffee, I'm driving over to Stellenbosch, which is like an hour's drive for me. Driving over to Stellenbosch, bring your girlfriend. I want to meet her. What am I doing? I'm pulling the relationship. I spent 80% of the time talking to his girlfriend, not to him. I'm building the relationship. And I'm not telling him how to do church. He's going to do it his way. But I want the relationship. That's how you do it. If you can't hold the relationship, those visionaries that you release will split your church. That's what they'll do.